Richey Edwards was the lyricist, the intellectual, the ghost of their firebrand soul. And then on February the 1st, 1995, he left a suitcase, an abandoned car at the Severn Bridge, and a silence that became the most defiant statement in rock history. This is a story of Richey Edwards, the disappearance that almost destroyed the Manic Street Preachers, and the decision that turned their grief into rebellion. Most bands in this situation would have moved on, replaced him, rebranded, or broken apart. But the Manic Street Preachers chose a different path. They refused to fill his space, refused to betray his memory, and refused to let the world dictate how grief should look. Instead, they carried his absence like a banner. They left his place on stage untouched. They continued to credit his lyrics, and they refused to let his ghost be replaced by convenience. That decision not to move on in the way the world demanded was more radical than any slogan they had ever spray painted, more rebellious than any song they had ever played. What followed wasn't just absence. It was a test of loyalty, integrity, and the very meaning of rebellion. Over the next 20 minutes, we'll explore how one band turned tragedy into a radical act of survival, and why sometimes the loudest rebellion is carried out in silence. In the early 90s, the Manic Street Preachers burst onto the British music scene like a Molotov cocktail in a sea of shoegaze and baggy jeans. While most bands of the era were content to play cool and keep their heads down, the Manics declared war on cultural apathy. Their weapons? Slogans, spray paint, eyeliner, leopard print blouses, and a belief that rock and roll could still be dangerous. They weren't just a band, they were a manifesto. They told anyone who would listen that they'd sell 16 million copies of their debut album, then break up and disappear. It wasn't marketing hype, it was a statement of intent. At the centre of it all was Richey Edwards. He wasn't the strongest musician in the band, but he was the mind, the lyricist, the intellectual firebrand. His words bled with politics, philosophy, literature. They were sharp, uncompromising, and carried the weight of someone who had already read everything worth reading by the age of 25. Live, the Manics were explosive. I saw them play Leicester University in January 1992, just before Generation Terrorist was released. They came on stage, played full speed for an hour, and then walked off to rapturous applause. No encore, no compromise. It was still one of the best gigs I have ever been to. They played like a punk band and looked like a glam band, but those lyrics, they were intellectual, political, socially aware, and right in your face with hooks so catchy they stuck in your head for weeks. The band embodied contradiction, and nothing summed that up more than the infamous For Real incident in 1991. When a journalist accused them of being all talk, Richey calmly carved the words "for real" into his arm with a razor blade, needing 18 stitches. It wasn't for shock value, it was proof, dangerous proof, that they meant every word that they said. But the very authenticity that fueled their success was becoming a cage for its most fragile member. You see, Richey wasn't just the band's lyricist, he was its conscience. While James and Nicky brought the riffs and the anthems, Richey's words gave the Manics their intellectual weight. He devoured literature, philosophy, history, political theory, And all of it poured out in dense, provocative lyrics that challenged listeners to think, not just to sing along. Songs like Faster or Yes weren't casual rock and roll, they were essays in miniature. Lines like, I am an architect, they call me a butcher, were dark reflections on consumerism, identity, power and despair. Fans didn't just hear themselves in Rich's words, they felt he was articulating something no one else was brave enough to say out loud. But the same intensity that made him such a powerful writer also made him deeply vulnerable. Richey struggled with depression, anorexia and self-harm. His honesty about these struggles was rare in the early 90s, a time when vulnerability was often hidden or mocked. Instead of masking it, he seemed to weave them into the band's very identity. Growing up in a small Welsh town, standing your ground wasn't optional, it was survival. His message was clear: I can do worse to myself than you could ever dream of doing to me. It became a strange kind of strength, a shield of sincerity that both inspired fans and trapped him in a cycle of proving authenticity at all costs. The infamous For Real carving wasn't just a shocking stunt. It was a glimpse into how tightly his pain and his art were bound together. And as the band's fame grew, the weight of expectation only made that bond more suffocating. For fans, this was part of his connection. He embodied sincerity even when it was destructive. To people who felt disillusioned, isolated or broken, Richey wasn't a rock star, he was a mirror. But for the band and for Richey himself, living up to that level of authenticity came at a terrible cost. The fire they lit was burning too close to home. In the final weeks of Richey's life, the story becomes hauntingly fragmented. He had been withdrawing £200 a day from his bank account, a total of £2,800 by the morning of February the 1st, 1995, the day he was due to fly to the US with James to begin a promotional tour. Instead, he checked out of the Embassy Hotel in London at 7 in the morning, drove back to his Cardiff flat and disappeared into a trail of faint, uncertain sightings. Over the next 2 weeks, people claimed to see him in Newport, at the passport office, the bus station, even taking a long taxi ride through the valleys where he'd grown up. That ride ended at the Severn View service station near Uist, just a short walk from the Severn Bridge. On February the 14th, his Vauxhall Cavalier was given a parking ticket there. 3 days later, it was reported abandoned. The battery was dead and there were signs someone had been living inside it. Because of the bridge's grim reputation, many believed he had taken his own life. But no evidence ever confirmed it. The press swirled with conspiracy theories and supposed sightings from Swansea to Goa. The band struggled not only with grief, but with the exploitation of their friend's disappearance. Fans, meanwhile, struggled with a grief that had no closure, keeping his image alive in shrines, letters and vigils. The Manics were paralysed. The voice of their intellectual soul had vanished, leaving only a question mark. The music industry demanded they make a decision, but for 6 devastating months, the only answer they could offer was silence. After 6 months of silence, the Manic Street Preachers faced the crossroads every band dreads. The industry expected a decision: disband, replace their missing lyricist, or somehow continue without him. Each option carried enormous risk. Replacing Richey would have meant betraying his memory and betraying themselves. Disbanding would have meant surrendering the energy, the fire and the commitment they had poured into the band since their teens. Continuing without him meant facing commercial pressure, critical scrutiny and a public that demanded answers. Against all expectations, they chose the third unthinkable path. They carried on, but they refused to replace Richey. They left his lyrics credited to him, split the royalties as before, and committed to making music under his shadow rather than filling the void with someone new. This wasn't just a business decision, it was an act of defiance. When other bands had lost their key members, the response was pragmatic. Joy Division lost Ian Curtis and became New Order, changing their sound. The Who lost Keith Moon and simply found another drummer. Nirvana split after Kurt Cobain committed suicide. The Manics chose something different. They chose loyalty over convenience, memory over immediacy, integrity over the music industry's formula. It was a gamble. Critics doubted them, labels worried, fans waited, anxious and uncertain. But in that silence, the Manics made a statement louder than any headline or protest. Some losses are too sacred to replace. Some ghosts too essential to ignore. And with that choice, the stage was set for Everything Must Go, the first album without Richey, but also the first proof that survival and rebellion could coexist. It was more than a collection of songs, it was a statement. The band's sound had been evolving for years. Steve Brown produced their debut. They then worked with David Aringa on Gold Against the Soul, which some criticised for its sound, returned to Brown for Holy Bible, and now, after Richey, they collaborated with Mike Hedges, who helped craft the new, expansive vibe that would define the album and stay with them for years. Each track carried the weight of absence, the intensity of grief, and the unyielding spirit of survival. Richey's shadow was everywhere, in the lyrics, the phrasing, and the melancholy that threaded through every song. Critics hailed it as a triumph, fans embraced it as catharsis, and the band proved something essential. They could continue without losing themselves. In the silence left by Richey, they found both freedom and fidelity, a paradox at the heart of their rebellion. And yet, the world quietly asked, could Nicky step up in the lyric department and step out of Richey's formidable shadow? Even as the Manics continued to make music, Richey's absence remained tangible. On stage, they left a microphone and a space for him, a silent acknowledgement that while he was gone, he was never truly missing. His presence lingered in every chord, every lyric, every pause. In 2009, the band released Journal for Plague Lovers, an album built entirely from Richey's final lyrics. It was as if his voice had returned from the past, haunting, uncompromising and utterly unmistakable. Critics and fans alike recognised it as both a tribute and a continuation of his artistic vision. For fans, the Severn Bridge became a pilgrimage site, a place to confront absence, remember brilliance and grapple with loss. In a strange, enduring way, Richey's silence became louder than ever, a ghost not only in the band but in the hearts of those who loved him. The story of the Manic Street Preachers is often told through slogans, headlines and shock value, but their truest act of rebellion was quieter and far more radical. It was the loyalty they showed to Richey, the silence they preserved, the refusal to replace a voice that mattered. In an industry driven by commerce and instant solutions, they chose authenticity over expedience, dignity over exploitation. They demonstrated that survival and integrity need not be mutually exclusive. Sometimes the loudest act of rebellion isn't a riot or a manifesto, it's to carry someone's ghost with dignity. Richey Edwards may have vanished, but his presence has never faded. The Manic Street Preachers did not just survive, they honoured him in every choice, every lyric, every stage left untouched. And they did not just go from strength to strength, they conquered to a level that maybe not even Richey could quite have imagined. It's a story that reminds us rebellion isn't always about noise or outrage. Sometimes it's in the quiet acts, the loyalty, the dignity, the refusal to compromise what matters most. What does carrying someone's ghost with dignity mean to you? And in a world that constantly demands we move on, how do you choose to honour what truly matters? Share your thoughts below, because some questions are louder when they're asked together. I hope you enjoyed this, and thank you for watching, and I'll see you next week when we look at another one.